You just, all right, so we're recording, so, okay. Hey, everybody, welcome to Nice Guy Deep Dive. I'm Ben.
And I'm Maddie.
And what we're gonna do is we're just two nice guys who are gonna take a little bit deeper dive into topics that we find interesting. So today is our episode 1, I guess we'll call it. And we're gonna talk about taking risks. So let's see what happens. So Addie, man, what made you choose this? Now, we're not going to do like a Q&A, right? We just decided we're going to chat, but I got to ask you, because this was your topic, what made you choose taking risk as the first topic?
Yeah, it's always been kind of like an interesting struggle for me since I was a kid, of like taking risks and actually realizing what actually are the pros and cons and making that decision. So there's two parts of it, right? The first is actually having the mental decision, and the second is actually having the action or the follow through with that risk. And I found myself many times taking the mental decision that I'm taking the risk, and then the next day like not having to follow through with the action. And that's kind of what triggered like me just into like self-development. And I mean, it's always been a very fundamental question for me.
I mean, when you were a kid, you actually thought about pros and cons of doing something?
Yeah, I'm saying more like when I was a teenager per se, more than like.
But even as a teenager, you thought about that? You actually like was like, pros and cons of jumping off my roof. You really thought about that stuff, or you just kind of did something?
I mean, I was one of those who actually thought about those things a little bit more. Maybe that I don't know if you did. Are you saying you didn't?
I did not.
You just went for it. You just like,
well,
the first thing that came to your mind, you went for.
No, I was really kind of a quiet kid. I really didn't, I was more worried about my mother. So I didn't do a lot of stuff. I just didn't want to hear it. But I'm just really fascinated with the fact that as a teenager, you actually thought about pros and cons. But I don't even know if that's what we're talking about here. I think you're talking about actual thought about a risk and then didn't follow through.
Yes,
I think that's
exactly.
more about what this is, not opposed to pros and cons. And then moving forward, you're like, should I climb that mountain or not? Oh, then you say, yeah, I'm going to climb that mountain, take that risk, and then you forget about it.
I mean, I remember it. I don't forget about it. I just don't do it because either it overwhelms me or it's just something that is like, okay, you were a little bit like, emotional the previous evening or whatever, and you're like, I want to do this, I want to do that, and the next day, like, reality hits you, And I feel the whole book, Don't Worry, Mr. Nice Guy, like this is a fundamental theme of just us underlying many of the breaking free activities, and I think while it's definitely something that many people, like different people, different struggles with this. Dr. Glover really breaks it down in so many different areas, like taking chances in your love life, with your career, with like your personal relationships. So it really is very, very, very central theme to the book.
Yeah, but that's too broad that's too broad for what we're doing, though. I mean, do you want to talk about taking risks in like any one area? Like taking risks with love or taking risks in business? I just don't want to get all too lofty, and I really want to keep it into the I, because that's what you and I normally do. So, I mean, so how can we approach this? What kind of risks do you want to talk about? Taking risks in personal life, in business, in families? I mean,
yeah.
I'll say this. For me, risk taking is more about knowing myself and knowing what I want to do if a risk is right for me, right? I don't jump on a train track just because it's there, unless somehow it's right for me to do, which it wouldn't be. But you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I think a lot of it, for me, risk taking has a lot to do about who I am and my authentic self, and moving from that point of view.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I think when you talk about being more specific about it, I think one thing is like taking risks in business and career, like in particular. That's been the one that I try to focus on quite a bit. and knowing what's the right next step that you take in your career is almost like a moving target, because
100%.
because you just need to be very strategic and forward thinking, and at the same time there is this huge element of like, oh, what if it goes wrong? What if I totally fail?
Sure. I mean, I guess that's one of the essentials of risk, is that you just don't know what the outcome is. And I think what stops a lot of people is trying to figure out what the outcome is, like trying to lay out every possibility. So you spend all your time literally looking at all the different possibilities rather than doing something. So, I mean, we've talked about this, I think, what is it, in Power Vulnerability, Brene Brown, she talks about perfectionism is the opposite of vulnerability. And it's kind of like that with taking risks. Like, we try to lay out every single thing that could possibly go wrong, and then we move, just so we're not shocked. But I find that to be, I mean, calculated risk maybe, but man, you never know until you actually do,
Yeah, there's this idea of the analysis of paralysis. I think that's what it's called.
Totally.
And you're just stuck in your head.
Totally. It's the worst. It's the absolute worst. But I find that it happens more often than not. And people, I'm going to say people, even though this is not about me, but I find that people use that as an excuse to not do. And it masks itself as actually doing something. Right. So I'm doing the analysis, therefore I don't actually have to do the thing, but you think I'm doing something. Does that make sense?
100%.
I run into people. So, I'm really big in the entrepreneur community, and I find people do that all the time. And I just want to say to them, you're not doing anything. You're playing at doing something. You're pretending to do, so you don't really have to do something.
Yes, and I feel this has been a very running theme in many of our conversations, because whenever we talk, it's always like I'm thinking, if I say this to Ben, the next question Ben's going to ask is, well, what have you done about it?
Well, it's really true. We did that with your piano, right? We did that with, yeah, sure. But you do the same thing with me. It's like, especially when we were talking about me and dating. And I said to you, like that one guy, I said to you, yeah, he doesn't really do much, but he does blah, blah, blah. And you were like, whoa. How could you be with somebody who's not a doer, who just, right? So, yeah, so that's good. That's why we're good friends, because we can call each other out on that stuff.
100%. Like, I was like, this is someone whose values Ben doesn't vibe with, and Ben's a doer and Ben's an action taker. So 100%, this is like, if you're not seeing it as a friend, I'm like, well, hey, I'll tell you, this is what I think is in my opinion, great for you.
It's kind of interesting how we compromise ourselves to get something we want, right? So I was literally willing to bend with what I really needed and wanted, because I thought I wanted a relationship more than actually being true to myself. So that was kind of a mess. I won't say a mess. It didn't really work, but now I'm friends with that guy, but it's just not going to be anything more than that. But taking risks, man. How was your interview? You had an interview. How'd that go? This whole week was about that, right?
Yeah, it was interesting. Definitely was good to work on the case study, learn more about it, figure out their industry. So I think in terms of that, it kind of helps. And yeah, considering even any potential move, like actually looking at the well, again, we go back to like the risk assessment of your taking an actual new role. And I mean, it really made me think of certain areas where I feel I might be lacking, or certain areas where I feel I could be, doing a little bit better. So in some way, I feel I need a little bit more practice with this stuff. But it was good. I mean, I like speaking to the person. He was explained the company's overview. He explained how the teams worked, all that stuff. Like, was a good experience. Yeah.
So this was the case study you did, and this was this the 4-hour interview?
Well, yes. So the actual 4-hour thing hasn't happened yet, and I won't name the company right now because this is probably going to be online and stuff. But I think it will happen sometime next week, I want to say, and like 7 to 10 days is what
So
the
what
time.
was the difference between, I mean, this was a risky thing to do, right? You don't know where it would be. It's for a startup or a startup company. You're in like banking industry. You're like in a very set, very risk averse in a sense position.
Yeah.
But what made you strike out? What made you kind of want to like step outside the comfort zone and try this out?
Yeah, I think always wanting to be part of something that's like small and that has this kind of scaling up, I think that's really important for me, because part of it is like, if you are at that stage, you have to kind of put on like multiple hats, so it's very interesting from a learning perspective. And you don't know, that's the thing, you don't know if it's going to work out because of the variables involved in like a small company, right? But
it's true.
Yeah, I mean, you know that better than anyone, having your own company. So I mean, in that sense, it's yeah. What are your thoughts on that scaling up?
Well, I mean, I actually left a full-time job to go work at a startup, and I was there for 3 months, and it was a complete disaster for me. So I left. And I was like, oh man, now what am I going to do? I don't have a job. But, I didn't, it's so funny. I kind of looked at this as the chance for the opportunity, right? And I didn't really think about what would happen if it didn't work out. I don't really like to enter things like that because it's almost like you're setting yourself up to have a bad outcome. I mean, I grew up with the whole idea of, having a backup. Right, you should do something, but you have a backup. And I find that when I have that backup, I tend to back up into it, because I don't put myself 100% into something because, well, I can always have this over here. So that's kind of what the way I approach risk. Now it's not risk. I don't risk things like, I'm not going to go to space. I don't want to be an astronaut, so I'm not going to do that. But I do risks that I think would be hopefully worthwhile. Anyway, that startup failed miserably, and I was really lucky to get my full-time job back. But I don't regret doing it. I mean, I learned a lot, but it really is a risk, man. If you get this gig with this company, it could go under, it could be successful, you could be a billionaire, you could work hard, all these things are possible. And that's really the idea. It's like, if you're ready to take on that adventure.
100%. I mean, you've just encapsulated like just the whole idea of like taking a risk or starting any new venture. And I mean, that's the excitement. That's the actual excitement of like, doing something new. And I think that too often the idea of having a backup, like you just said, right? People use that as a crutch. And well, again, we should use the I will say I, and I have used that as a crutch in the past, and I don't know exactly. So as you mentioned, you also have. So we've all done that, and at some point there was this idea of commit to something first, and after that figure out like what you need to do to get there. So it's interesting. It's like
there's an element of that. There's an element of that. I mean, again, the thing is about. Hold on 1 second. Hold on.
Sure.
I'll have to cut that out. My cat decided to eat some plastic.
No worries.
I'll cut that out. Anyway, he eats plastic. So where were we? Where were we before my cat?
Oh, we're talking about having a backup and how you and I use it as a crutch in the past.
Yeah. That really comes from my parents, and that really comes from, I think, your parents grow up in a certain time where, either money was scarce or jobs were scarce or something. There was a scarcity, right? I mean, right, we can talk about scarcity and abundance, right? But there was a scarcity, so it was always, that's great, but that was my mom. That's great, but. And it's always been that but that you end up listening to, right? So being an actor is great, but if you go to college, you get a degree, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's that kind of a thing. It's great to have these dreams, but a bank is steady. A bank gives you security, XYZ, whatever. So I think what I'm really curious about those, because you said that as a teenager and maybe into your 20s, you were very much about like, I'm thinking about risks, but then I kind of just don't follow through. But you've changed. I don't see that as you anymore. When do you think that change happened? When did that change happen for you?
That's a good question. That change happened, I want to say about 2017-ish, like 4.5 to 5 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
And was there any one thing that happened?
Yeah, it was very curious because I was, so as you know, and if people are listening to this, for them, the next thing, I used to be living in America for about like 8.5 years, and now I'm in London. And in America, the immigration system is kind of different. So as an immigrant, like you have these visa lottery systems, and you see like if you kind of go into a pool with people, and let's say 40% of the people get a visa for that year, and then it's like the next year there's another lottery and all that kind of stuff, right? So essentially in 2017 was like a big moment where I was like out of opportunities to apply for a visa. And I was thinking, what do I actually want to do? And I never imagined to be in a situation where I would have to face that decision. I always thought things would go smooth. And one of the ideas was like, hey, just leave America, go somewhere else. That was option A. And option B was to like, hey, maybe I should go back to business school. So I did a degree at Rutgers, Master of Business and Science. And it was like, what do I do? If I go back to school, I'm putting in 50 grand of my own money for another degree. And if I leave the country, I didn't feel that I was finished in the US. And I was like, something that's totally like a huge risk for me. And like, because that 50 grand, I worked my butt off to earn that 50 grand in the past 2.5 years. So I was like, okay, well, you know what? You only live once, and this is something that's totally different to what I've done in the past. I've always tried to look at it. I think it's a very linear path to get somewhere. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And when I did, it was very, very freeing. I honestly really, really felt that once I removed that sort of expectation in my head of having a linear path, of actually being okay with a totally different path, and still thriving in that path, because currently I was still able to maneuver myself into London and having a great job here. So while still being successful in spite of having this non-linear path, that was something that I never thought would be possible.
Yeah, but something clicked in your head where you were no longer like thinking about it and then like brushing it off. It's like, I'm going to do this. And you said this was, how old were you when that happened?
How old was I? I was
30 something.
28. I was 28.
Yeah. So, I mean, I moved to New York when I was 33. I basically, it was the same kind of thing I kept saying to my friends, oh, I'm going to move to New York. I'm going to move. And finally, I'm at a party, and my best friend was hearing the conversation, and I said, I'm going to move. And she literally pulled me inside, and she says, either move or shut the fuck up. I'm sick of hearing this. So literally within a month, I was in New York, because she was right. She was right. It's like talk is like, so it really is cheap. And actually, to this day, I'm not a fan of talkers to an extent. I mean, people talk, you have to talk about things, but then there are some actions that have to be taken in order to move forward. And when those actions don't happen, I lose interest very quickly.
So I'm curious. So you said you always wanted to move to New York. So in those few years, what was actually going through your mind that prevented you every time when you were like, oh, should I go to New York?
It was pure fear. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how to get an apartment. I didn't have a job. Leaving my family, leaving everybody I knew. I mean, it really was that, if you think about it, it is that simple. It really was. It was all those things. And then when she said that, I don't know what it was, but it just was like, what am I waiting for? You know, kind of like your moment. It's like, what am I waiting for? And I literally bought a one-way ticket. I didn't even buy a round trip. I bought a one-way ticket.
Nice, nice.
Yeah. So I don't really know. It was just something that said I could do it. I don't really know what, but something in my head said I can do it now. You know, I'm not a kid. I'm 33. That's not a kid. You know, I'm still finding myself though, and it was leaving my family, and it was leaving, you know, I didn't realize how much I relied on my family until it was time to leave. And you're like, oh my God, I really, you know, and not always in the best way, right? But so that's kind of what it was. And it was really the best thing I ever did for myself, was getting on that plane and not knowing anything, and literally just having to rely on myself for everything. You know, it was yeah, it was pretty crazy, but I'm really glad I did it. And yeah, so I've been in New York now over 21 years. August 3rd, 1999, baby. Exact date. Yeah, but
No,
are you still finding?
Go ahead. Sorry. No, no. I was going to say.
Go ahead.
All right, I'll go. I was going to say it's interesting that our stories were kind of similar in that sense. We both had that moment, like you know, where it just clicked, or where we took that step, and somehow it brought me thinking to the fact that, like, is there a limit, or is there a point in time where you can do this, and is there a certain, I guess, point in your life where you just don't have the strength or the forward momentum to do it? Because I know friends of mine who always struggled with, like, just, you know, speaking out or about anything, and even like making a small step towards like a big goal in their head, and we're like, well, I mean, is it just a strong barrier? Because I know for me, for the longest time, the barrier was always doubt. The barrier is always doubt and fear. For some people, it could just be they don't care enough about achieving their goals.
Well, I mean, for those people who don't care, you can't do anything about that, right? I mean, if you don't care about it, if you're one of those people who say, I want to buy a home, and then you just kind of forget about it, it just becomes talk. So
that's the thing, and I feel like, so for me, like, if I have a goal now, and if I have a goal, let's say after 6 months, I feel that if I care more, like it's possible I could care more about the goal in 6 months than I care about it now. You know?
Well, it's really true. You and I were working on this. You were helping me with my goal list for my coach, my business coaching, right? So at that point, it wasn't about what can I do today versus, well, it was about listing everything and then ranking them, right? So it's totally possible that you list something you want to do, but you're not ready to do it yet. So it ranks at the bottom of the list. That doesn't mean you don't want to do it. It just doesn't mean you want to do it this minute. Yeah, so I think that's totally fine. And to be honest with you, if it comes time to do it and you're not interested anymore, that's okay. I mean, that's the thing. There's erasers on pencils. There's delete on keyboards. Nothing is in stone, right? So I kind of think of it that way. But what I was saying is that what I did was talking about moving and not doing anything. And that finally got on my friend's nerve, because she's a doer, right? And you can really only take so much of that talk until it drives you nuts, right?
Before you're like, shut up or
it's whatever. It's really true. I mean, and that's why you and I are friends. I will tell you this, we would not be friends if all you did was talk. We just wouldn't connect. There would be absolutely no way, unless we were like related somehow, and then we'd have to be family, right?
Yeah.
It's like you were my brother or something. Yeah.
Just to add context to anyone who's listening, we've been having conversations like this for the last, I don't know, 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks, and we just thought, like, hey, might as well just, you know, put a mic, like, you know, just talk and record this and share it with all of you.
Yeah. I love how you say all of you. Nobody's watching. Nobody's listening. There is no audience.
Well, hey,
Maybe there will be, but maybe there will be one day. Yeah. So risk. I don't know, man. What else do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about this some more? Do you feel you got a handle on this whole risk thing?
I think so. Like, I think now I'm in a position where I think I've got a handle on the risk. But it's interesting because I actually worked in risk management in the past. So actually,
Yeah.
it's kind of been like my profession to work in risk, and that's a totally different ballgame. Like,
isn't it different when you're assessing somebody else's risk versus your own, though?
100%.
So, I mean, your stake in that risk is your job, maybe, and you get your paycheck, but you don't have a personal stake in it, other than you want to do a good job, but you don't assume any of the risk.
Yeah, so there's actually one. So I was never like a trader, but I actually know traders, and there are traders who's like, well, I mean, when they're trading, like they actually sometimes assume some of the risk on behalf of the firm.
But
that's interesting. So that's the one exception where, like, at work, a risk for someone could overlap with your own risk.
Well,
but I would say for me, it was never that overlap.
But if you're a trader and you work on commission, right, their risk is your risk.
Yes.
Right, because if they don't make money, you don't make money. So it is more personal on that end. But you're a salary guy.
Yeah, it's fixed.
Whatever happens to that company, it happens, but you still get a paycheck.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a bonus component, but it was like not as high as, like, the traders are, like, let's say,
still not the same
most of it is bonus.
Yeah, which is really that's a cumulative thing, right? Over the aggregate of a year or something. But I guess I don't know, man. I guess how can we relate risk back to maybe? I don't know. I feel like let's do this. Let's come to an end on this topic, and I'll stop the recording, and then let's just you and I have a conversation. Because I feel like I'm done with risk at this point. I'm going to stop the recording now. Well, anyway, let me just do this and then I can cut the thing. So this is the end of episode 1. We talked about risk. I'm just going to button this up. Thanks for watching. If anybody's watching, Nice Guy Deep Dive. Hopefully we'll get better at this as we go on. But I just want to say goodbye for now. And Addie, what do you want to say? What's your farewell going to be?
So adios, I guess.
All right, Addie says adios. All right, cool. Thanks.